I can't think without a pen in my hand.
That's the way to be.
And
Neither can anyone else. You just know it.
What about your nightstand?
My nightstand, I have this notebook on the nightstand.
Mm-hmm.
I only started that about a year and a half ago, and I can't believe it took me that long.
Well, the big joke in my office is, can he read his writing in the dark at night? Because I'm saying, the other day, I have the world's greatest assistant, and she's been with me for, this will be a 33rd year. And she's still only 25 years old, which is amazing. But she, last week, so I take the notes out of my pocket and I said, Patty, I wrote myself this note. I can't figure it out. So she figured it out. I said, you can read my mind. I can't.
It's happened to me. It's happened to me in our little grocery list, which I put at Kate's height, but I'm the one who writes on it all the time. So it's always terrible. The other night, I woke her up writing in this notebook because she thought it was the scratching of a mouse. And she sat up, bolt upright in bed, like something out of a horror film, and scared the bejesus out of me. That was eventful. Yeah.
The next move for me is a whiteboard in the shower.
I get it. I have a glass wall in my shower, so I could just use that.
But you got to get back to it fast, otherwise it fades.
Yeah, because it gets so steamy. And
my wife said, you put a whiteboard in the shower, I'm ripping it out.
Well.
So now I have to say it out loud.
Right.
That I want to remember it. And then when I get out, I write it down.
Well, you could use memory palace techniques like visual mnemonics. I'll sometimes do that.
Tell me.
So you take whatever it is, like let's say you want to remember 3 things.
Yes.
So let's say you want to remember, I don't know, you want to remember.
I want to send a note. I got to go back upstairs, pick this up, and I have to make an appointment for the car to be repaired.
Okay, so you would picture yourself driving a car up the stairs while writing in a pad of paper.
Actually, I without knowing what it was, I do those.
Yeah.
I make up a mnemonic for it.
That's exactly what it is, visual mnemonics. Yeah.
Hmm.
I have a whole system. I
got CAC. Okay, now I can figure it out.
Yep. But the whiteboard would be nice.
Yeah.
My office in St. John's it's like a cubicle within an office, kind of like we share this huge space like this, like even bigger. But then there are cubicles with 4 walls and doors within it. But we all share the ceiling. And so I have windows to the exterior on one side and a window to the interior on the other side. And when things are really cooking, then I just get out my whiteboard markers and start writing on
the
all
of
my windows.
Oh, yeah, good.
Yeah.
Except it's tough to take them with you.
Well, exactly.
That's when you take a picture.
Yeah, so I take the pictures now, but back in the day, I didn't even do that. But it means I'm probably coming back into the office to finish whatever that project is. My brain is not sufficient by itself.
So tell me, you were born in Ireland.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And 4 years old, migrated to the U.S.?
Yep.
And where in Ireland?
Dublin, County Dublin, a place called Kilturnan.
Say again?
Kilturnan.
Kilturnan.
So it's in South County Dublin, but it's still on the bus line. So you're still really in the city.
So south of, what is that? Like the embassy area?
Yeah, so that's Dublin 4.
It's Dublin 4, yeah.
So it's rather south of that. It's pretty well south of
and
that.
And the mall is further south of there, the famous mall.
Yeah, Dundrum.
Dundrum, yeah.
You've got it, yeah. So Dundrum would be one of the local, destinations for shopping for sure. It used to be different. It used to be quite different. I remember Dundrum when I was a child.
Not nice?
No, it was nice. It was cozier and smaller.
And then the mall came in.
Well, it was a mall, but it was a kind of, an Irish 80s, 90s mall, which had a different feel to it. That place has grown up so much, and one of the places that has changed, that has not changed, is the library.
Ballsbridge.
And that's Ballsbridge is
where the embassy is.
Yeah, that's where that's the D4 area.
Right, there's a cute little town just east of there, Sandymount.
Sandymount, yeah. So you know Ireland pretty well, huh?
I've been there a lot. I used to be on a board there, so I'd be there 4, 5, 6 times a year.
What were you on the board for?
The board, that company was Willis. It was a global insurance broker.
Oh.
So it was Marsh, Aon, and Willis. And then it became Willis, Towers, Watson after a merger.
So the house where I was born, it's in a place called Moss Cottages. And it's actually kind of well known in a sense because everybody sees it on the bus on the way to Enniskerry if they're going to Power Square. And the little shop at the end of that row of just a handful of cottages was Willis's for the longest time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Not all Willis.
Now you're Willis. No, this is small Ireland.
We had our offices in the Docklands, and I guess it was about a dozen years I traveled there. I retired from that board several years ago, but the Docklands grew while we were there.
Oh yeah!
All of a sudden, a building went up next to us, filled up with Googleites. It was amazing to see the transformation of that area.
Yeah, the Keys used to be a little bit hairy, sort of maybe romantic as well. Not unmixedly negative or anything, but yeah, in a matter of really a few years, it seems to have just completely reversed.
But Dublin's just very comfortable to me. I loved going there. It's a small city.
Yeah.
But it's a great walk-around city. You can walk everywhere.
I was going to say it, yeah.
So we stay out at the Intercontinental, which used to be the Four Seasons there in Ballsbridge. We eventually moved downtown to the Shelbourne.
Oh, nice.
Very nice. But I liked it out of Ballsbridge too because you could walk over to Sandymount. You're right on the train line. But I walked into town all the time.
Yeah.
And walked all around. So I got to know the city quite well on my walking tours.
That's great.
You get there, you got to get the cobwebs out after an overnight trip to Dublin from New York. And the best therapy for me was take a good long walk.
So what years were you there? This sounds to me like it was the 2000s, but maybe the second half of the 2000s.
Second half of the 2000s, up until about 2020, I think is when I retired.
I was there again for undergrad, so that was 2000 and 2004. But I used to visit pretty frequently when I was a kid in the summers.
I've walked all through Trinity,
and
around. You
ever take a tour?
I did.
Did you have, do you remember?
They have a book that is kind of famous.
Yeah, right? Not that they make anything of it. The tour guide there is a kind of local celebrity.
Oh, yeah?
Dublin famous. Joe Gorman has friends with him. And I saw him one of the last times I went to Dublin. I try to get there still. One of my projects is based in Dublin. So I have professional reason to be there, and I still have plenty of friends and family there as well. So.
Yeah, that makes it all the more special. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's great. I mean, I've been able to go there for work 2 or 3 times, and that feels like cheating.
All the best.
I want to go there anyway, but it's totally legitimate. I do have work there.
What work do you have there?
I have a project on the notion of representation in cognitive science. Mm-hmm. So if you read a smattering of articles in cognitive science, maybe not one, but if you read 3 or 4, you're probably going to come across the term representation a lot, and pretty centrally. So people, like in perceptual psychology, for example, they'll say, the subject has a representation of this color or this object or something. And it's not a term that has a standard definition either across the disciplines or even within any given discipline. And what's more, that's not very clearly understood. It's sort of broadly acknowledged, but there isn't a thoroughgoing account of the different senses of the term. So I started this project a handful of years ago with my friend Tomas, and quickly we gained some people and it got a little bigger, to examine this concept historically and analytically. So it's called representation past, present, and future. So we're doing all at the same time. We're trying to do the intellectual history. How do we get here?
Yep.
But then also take the measure of the various fields and how the term is used, which is
different in every field.
Very different, and different within the field. You and I can both be scientists of memory, for example, and both have different ideas in mind, and not necessarily know that about each other when we're having our conversation.
So that's the benefit and the curse of vocabulary.
Yeah, for sure.
We all use vocabulary to control things, but my sense of representation could be very different than yours.
Yeah.
But we both use the term representation.
And it's a mixed blessing because we probably are doing things we couldn't have done if we hadn't been a little loose with the terminology. So the idea here isn't that, we've all been committing some intellectual sin this whole time, but more that it might be time to take a fuller account of what's going on, just so we have a menu of options. And so in the project, we don't try to dictate we should all use the term in this or that way. A lot of people have particular agendas, and many of them are plausible. But let's just get it all out there on a menu first. So we're building towards a taxonomy, and then that's the future part, which is sort of we want to recommend that people use this taxonomy that we haven't made ourselves, but we've made just by kind of taking advice from everybody and making observations.
Drawing the conversation to a conclusion.
Yeah, it was synthesizing like all of these different threads and saying, okay, so here's what's on offer. Here are the 88 senses of representation, and maybe here's some way of organizing them. But in future, if you think other people might not understand you, then use this as a resource. Find yourself in this space, and then use it as a way to tell people, and they can have a common frame of reference with you.
So when you say it's based in Ireland, how is it based in Ireland, the project?
So my friend Tomas is at Trinity, and he had funding from Wellcome for a while through his colleague Mani Ramaswamy. They're at the Trinity College Institute of Neuroscience. So through that funding, we were able to have a research assistant for a year, and she was based
at Trinity.
At Trinity, yeah. And we held an invitation workshop at Trinity, and all of that really got things going. And so organizationally, we're still based there in the sense that our website is hosted by it, albeit out of date, but we're working on that. And we just had a neuroscience student do her capstone project, and she was a Trinity student, and we've just hired an intern from Trinity. So that's not all of we have some, volunteer support from other places, but the first and most official channel tends to be Trinity. But obviously I'm at St. John's, so it's
So St. John's getting any credit for this work?
Oh yeah, for sure. No, it's Tomas and I do it, but I say that it's based, and we also use Dublin time, which is important because our meetings are scattered across the world. I'm sure you're used to this kind of thing. One thing that happened, I think in a lot of ways, but certainly for us in COVID, was that things were actually oddly facilitated by people having to go into lockdown, because the scientists
changed a lot of things.
It's changed a lot of things in ways that, of course, will only become clear to us in the fullness of time. I don't pretend to have any handle on any of that. But just locally, in my experience, the good thing, because Tomas and I had the project idea, we had the germ of it, and we had talked to some people who took it seriously. But when COVID happened, all of the scientists had to come out of the lab, and they wanted to use their minds, and they wanted to talk theory.
And they were accessible on this thing called Zoom.
Exactly.
Or Teams.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a surprisingly good thing for us.
So 4 years old, mom and dad say, we're moving to the States. What did your mom and dad do in Ireland?
They worked, my father taught for a little while, but he worked as a copywriter in advertising, as did my mother. And my mother's parents were American. So my mother is Boston Irish. Her parents were in Boston, and they were older than my father's parents. I think that was the primary motivation. So my father got a job in advertising in New York, and then we went over, and that's where my parents were based for the rest of my father's life. My mother's still alive and living in Forest Hills. And
so was it Forest Hills you moved to? I know you live there now.
That's right. Yeah. It's always been Forest Hills in one shape or another.
It's not really Queens, so.
Well, this is a very philosophical thing. What are the necessary and sufficient conditions for something being
not that much affluence?
Well, there's Forest Hills Gardens,
which is
and
really
then there's
nice,
Forest Hills,
which is nice.
We are Forest Hills. We are not Forest Hills Gardens. We know people in Forest Hills Gardens, and we like it. It's nice to have it right there.
Austin Street's beautiful there too.
Yeah, we started off Metropolitan.
Yep.
On the same block as Krause's Candy.
Know it well.
Oh yeah, it's still there under a different name, but
southeast corner.
Correct. So we were on the
You were by Fox's funeral home.
right. So we were south of the of Metropolitan on the west side of the block. There's a pine tree.
Yep.
In front, and I still go on a regular basis to the Collector's Den, Norman, the little antique shop there. But I go to Cinemart and all sorts of places. A lot about Metropolitan Avenue hasn't changed. I used to work in the paint store there.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm still there. Joe's still
nice
in
neighborhood.
charge. Yeah.
There's a great Italian restaurant closer to Woodhaven Boulevard on the north side of the street.
Which one?
Alberto's.
Alberto's.
Gone. Is it gone?
Yeah, recently-ish.
Oh.
Yeah, last couple of years. I think it was a happy conclusion. I think
They retired.
They were done, and that was that. So the kind of
next
thing
generation isn't interested in working that hard.
Well, that's the thing. Like we always think, well, sell it to somebody so it keeps it going, and maybe they couldn't find somebody, or maybe they just thought it was simpler.
Yeah.
But the same thing happened with Chalet Alpina, which was next door to us.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my parents' home. I used to go on a weekly basis.
I think that's the first place I had Lance's Rosé.
Oh yeah.
You remember that wine? It came in a.
Is that the one that has a funny shape?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was like a clay colored bottle, and it was like the rage when I was just of age. Lance's Rosé. It was exotic.
That's fun.
So, where'd you go to school in Queens?
I went to Our Lady of Mercy, which is on Kessel Street, Catholic school. And then for high school, I went to Manhattan, about 40 blocks north of here, Regis.
Great school.
Yep, it was great. It was great for me. I still have connections to it. Going back soon. Next month I'll be there.
I'll show you a great Regis picture. I was out to dinner with some friends. My wife and I were out to dinner with some friends on Friday night, and he reminded me he played basketball at Regis a very long time ago, and he played against another famous fellow, and they caught a picture of him doing jump ball against him.
Whoa!
That fellow's name at that time was Lou Alcindor. He went to Power Memorial, which is no longer there, and my buddy realized he wasn't going to get the ball on the jump, so he just stood there, and it's just a comical picture of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar towering over this fella.
That's fantastic.
So it goes down in Regis history.
Does Regis know about this?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't know why it isn't on a plaque somewhere.
It should be.
It really should. I'm making a note. I talk to people at the school still.
I have a buddy who's on the board there. His name is Brendan McGuire.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan's a very well-known prosecutor. He worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office for a long time, and he's been very good to Regis for a long time as well. He's a terrific guy. Then he went to work for a fellow by the name of Mayor Adams. Mm. So he was his counsel for the first 2 years of Mayor Adams' office, and now he's back in private practice. But he's a proud and supportive alum of Regis.
Oh, very good. Okay. Noted.
And then, so then how did you decide to go to Trinity? A combination of connected to family, your own heritage and history. What sounds like a wonderful thing and place to do, a place to go and a wonderful thing to do.
It's not that, but it was that and a little bit more. So I was, like I said, I would go over in the summers, even when I didn't live in Ireland. So I maintained a pretty strong connection. And when I was there in the summers as a teenager, I would go to Trinity and walk through it because that's one of the things to do. And also there are things happening, there are plays going on and young people and stuff. And even if I couldn't really plug into it, I could get a sense of it. Mm. And it looked great. But that's not enough. And it was very, meaningful that my parents went there, but that's not enough either. Yeah. But what really did it?
It would have been enough for me.
Well, I guess in the absence of anything else, like that could tip the scales. But what really I found compelling about it was that the system over there, as you know, is you choose what you want to study going in. So you don't go in and kind of cast about with a general sense of what you might like and then find a major after a year or two or three. And I knew I wanted to do philosophy and history. And I knew I could do just philosophy and history. Mm-hmm. So I applied for it and got it. And okay, that's it.
Reasonably inexpensive to go to, isn't it?
Comparatively speaking, absolutely. It's changed many times over the years. And there are certain times when I could have gone for free because I was Irish born. But at the time, the rule was that I had to have been a resident for the 2 years immediately prior. Mm-hmm. So my parents had to pay. At the same time, I don't know, you pick whatever the equivalent school in the United States was, it would have been, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 times more expensive,
Sure.
maybe more. I can't remember the numbers, but that's my vague sense of it.
Great year for St. John's.
Yeah. Oh, you mean the basketball? Yeah. Coming up in the world again.
Is there any teaching that goes on there?
Yeah. From time to time. I remember putting in a few hours yesterday.
I was watching a fellow on a YouTube clip. His name is Eric Weinstein. He's a mathematician on the faculty at Harvard. A very thoughtful, smart guy about a lot of things. But he said something about the universities in the U.S. Maybe he meant the world, but certainly he meant the U.S. He said that it looks like they're there to teach, but they're really there to accumulate and gather great minds to work on really hard and tough issues and problems. And it just, when someone says something who's really smart like that, it caused me to rethink a bunch of stuff, especially now when you see funds being pulled away from universities as a punishment for the behaviors that should never have gone on campus. It makes you realize that it's not just a school; it's a place for great minds to gather, as he said, and have these people assembled and interacting together all the time, so they can work on big and important things like you do.
I think that's right. I had a colleague at St. John's, died a couple of years ago, sadly, Vadim, and he pointed out to me that the only thing you need for a university is professors. Rockefeller University being an example of this.
Yes.
But strictly speaking, you don't need students. You just need professors doing research. You don't need administration. Strictly don't need students. I mean, you want students. Students should be part of it.
Yes. But that's your point is the right one. It's the apparent part of it. It's a visible part of it, but it's just a part of it.
Right. Instead of thinking of it as a next and almost inevitable stage in schooling, which is how we've come to think of it. And from the outside, especially. So if you're in a university setting, from the way that you spend your own time, or if not that, from the way that many of your colleagues spend their time, how much is devoted to research, how much energy and time. And teaching is time consuming. It's especially time consuming up front. The first time you teach a course, put in an incredible number of hours.
Sure.
But after you've taught a course a few times, you can modify it around the edges here and there, but you can, you've front loaded a lot of the work, which is good. Whereas research is just a constant beast. So yes, it's nice to hear that people are spreading the word that universities aren't simply there to take your kids after they finish high school when they don't know what to do next.
I work with a lady in my office. Her son is at the University of South Carolina, which is a very popular school now. I think there are 4 ladies in my office, on our Jericho, Long Island office. Just coincidentally, each of the 4 have a child at University of South Carolina right now.
Wow.
It's amazing. It used to be all the kids from New York and Long Island would go to New England, and now they all want to go south. Apparently, weather matters.
Interesting.
Anyway, he's doing his semester abroad. I don't remember my semester abroad. I didn't have one, but he's living a life. So he's in Florence. A weekend ago, he was in Belgium. They're going to Barcelona this weekend. Oh no, last weekend was Monte Carlo. The weekend before that was Barcelona. The weekend before that was Belgium. He's been skiing in Switzerland. What a life!
That's too much fun. I don't know if that should be allowed.
I'm sure he's learning a great deal in the classroom.
Right.
So after Trinity, after that great experience, you decided to go deeper and you went to Cambridge.
That's right. And a professor of mine advised me on this. I didn't know about the program on my own. I knew I was going to study philosophy ultimately.
Yes.
But I also didn't want to study philosophy exclusively. There was a reason I did both history and philosophy as an undergraduate. And I thought, given that the trajectory here is a PhD in philosophy, let me do a master's in history. And then this professor told me about this program in intellectual history at Cambridge. And I got in, which was great. So I had a wonderful year at Cambridge, and maybe the thing that I learned that's most enduring is how important and difficult intellectual history is. So yes, I wrote some papers and a dissertation, and I haven't forgotten what I learned. I don't have everything at my fingertips, but I do draw on it from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
But I have this enduring appreciation for how the ideas that we treat as the furniture of the world, as common sense, as obvious, or as intuitive, all have a historical path. And it's contingent, and it could have been different. The concepts that we use come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, the concepts that we use are here by accident. And when you know that, it's very humbling. And you put a lot less stock in.
All right, give us an example of something we think of as the regular course of how things are that's an accident in current times.
Well, in my area, both consciousness and mind. But mind is a little harder to talk about. Consciousness, though, is in the sense that we tend to talk about it, and especially in the sense that it's talked about by people in analytic philosophy and cognitive science. We treat consciousness like this is obvious, self-evident phenomenon that must have been mystifying to human beings since the dawn of time. No, not so. Now, you can go back to different times and places and look at things that might be comparable in certain ways. So I'm not saying that this appeared out of nowhere in 1940 in England or America. But you pick up the different threads here and there. It really starts to gather steam in the 17th century, but only a few of the pieces are in place. And then the properties that we associate with it, especially in professional consciousness studies, come in around the 1950s. So you have now a state of affairs where scientists and philosophers will begin arguments in consciousness by stating, like, here's a definition of consciousness. Consciousness is what it is like to experience the world subjectively and immediately. And no, like, that's 1891 is the first time that the phrase "what is like" is used, and here's where the notion of subjectivity comes from. Like, but it's a very pale, version of it. And
all right, we have to jump ahead then now, Professor, because one of the things I'm dying to ask you about, I can't wait any longer to get into with you, based on that example you just gave us. You deal with young people all the time in your teaching craft. What concerns do you have about young people today and the challenges they're having? One is another professor I'm fond of and listen to on a regular basis from NYU, Scott Galloway. And Professor Galloway is very concerned about young men and their role in our world today. My words, not his. The consequence of other things that have happened in the most recent history, emancipation of women, equal opportunity for women, the fact that now women make up the majority of attendees at university, a majority of applicants in medical school and in law school and all the professional schools. The Me Too movement and the impact it's had on young men and their willingness to ask a gal on a date at work, and whether or not that's verboten. All of these things conspiring to change the landscape for young men. All the contributing factors. Couples are marrying on average later, starting families later. The cost of housing, it's very expensive for young people, man or woman, to move out on their own that first time. That first step is a big one. He's very concerned about the mental health of young men, some of whom are choosing to stay at home, hang out in the parents' basement for way too long, and not engage in dating or in social activities with women. Do you share any of those concerns?
I can't speak to what Scott Galloway said. I can't speak to what he says, although I can speak to the issues as you've raised them. And I am concerned about young people, and I suppose I'm concerned about young men. I think young women have a unique set of equally compelling issues to deal with.
But different.
Overlapping, but different, sure. Certainly, both young men and young women have to deal with very uncertain economic situation as well as an uncertain social situation.
But that's always been the case, hasn't it? We're always concerned. The circumstances will be different, but there's always been concern.
The circumstances differ, but so the different circumstances here, I think, matter when you talk about people living in their parents' basement, that kind of thing. It's hard to conceive of owning property, maybe at all, and certainly before something like middle age, which is not what young people are thinking about anyway.
The concept of owning assets.
I don't think that's how it would be framed. I think when you're 16 or 20 and you're thinking about what you might be doing when you're 22 or 25 or 27, it's more like, can I be living on my own? And then when you are in your 20s and living maybe on your own, if you're lucky, can you think in terms of buying a place somewhere? And that's not really the path.
I think it's pretty foreign right now.
It's pretty foreign.
Yeah.
So, and that wouldn't have been the case maybe a generation or two ago. And so
I remember, 100 years ago when I was of that age, you always thought you were on the path to marry, buy a house, and I'm guessing you're right that my kids are older than that now, but I remember my boys were, why would you buy a car? Living in New York, why would you buy a car? Why would you spend all that money on a house? Now they were saying this while they're visiting our beach house and drinking my wine, but then they got married and boom, that's all out the window. They're buying houses and they just delayed it for a bit longer.
Well, maybe they were able to do it eventually, but many aren't, and many are doing it in a way that's not sustainable or brings with it other problems. Doing a lot of things on credit. And it's very hard to get yourself out of that hole. And I think the statistics on that aren't something that are at my fingertips, but credit card debt is, I believe, a more serious problem for this generation and the last couple of micro generations than it was for a generation ago.
Absolutely.
So in the background, you have perhaps a unique set of economic uncertainties. That's not a good backdrop for anything. Now, education, formal education, schooling in the United States has never really been designed hierarchically, at least. It's never been, central policy with the view towards informing the development of the full person. If you look at the history of educational policy in the United States and in Great Britain, for that matter, it's, again, and this is echoing what I was saying about intellectual history, it's historically contingent. It's a lot of series of accidents.
Yes.
We don't have to get into the details, but the point is that
the computer changed everything. The internet changed it again. And now AI is going to change it again.
We'll see. But the thing is, it's not like in the 19th century when the conventions came into being, that they were designed with a view towards how best to educate the excellent individual and community member.
Yep.
They weren't. It was more a matter of
preparing them for a career.
It wasn't even that. It was, you can't do this as a one-room schoolhouse thing because there's a population boom. It's the Industrial Revolution. So you got to put them all in one place. What should we do? Why don't we divide them up by age? Okay, sounds good. What should we teach? Well, what do they do at universities? Well, here's one way of dividing up subjects. Okay, so let's do that. And you had educational, reformers and philosophers of education who said, well, there are better ways to think about this. The 6-year-old isn't the same as the 18-year-old, and the person who wants to finish middle school or high school isn't someone with the same goals as the person who wants to go to college. So maybe there should be a different curriculum and a different trajectory and so on. Didn't matter. So none of that was ever in place. So you already have...
You just assume it's always been.
Right. Now, the people, of course, who are involved in doing the teaching take it seriously, and or at least many of them, or most of them do, and they can bring a lot to it, and they can inform the development of the individual person and the community member in all sorts of meaningful ways. Mm-hmm. But the point is that things were not set up to make that happen. And if things are getting more complicated lately because of technology, it's complicating an already problematic organization.
It's morphing without design.
Right.
Thoughtful design.
Right. So
let's talk about the impact AI might have. I heard someone talk the other day about, everyone's concerned, there could be negatives with AI. There could be a lot of positives too. One of the positives I heard for students is an AI tutor can be much more accessible, cost-wise, time-wise, facilities-wise, than a live tutor. And it could actually be better in some respects because it can determine that little Johnny is distracted and not paying attention anymore and can, on the spot, change everything to get the kid back on track and focused again.
Yes, I can see that happening. I can see local positives.
And I can put on an immersive headset like the Apple glasses, and I could get real training on something. Language immersion, mechanicals. I was wearing an Apple headset and for a demo, and they showed me how Rolls-Royce is using these. And I walked right into a jet engine and saw the parts. I felt like I could touch them. It's going to change a lot of things.
My son, who's 5.5, recently envisioned something very similar. This was about 2 days ago. And he told me during dinner that he's had an idea for a while, but now he knows how to make it. And I said, okay.
So this is a dinner, 5.5-year-old. Yeah. What's his idea?
So his idea was that he wants to have a headquarters helmet. And so he said, how do you spell it? And I said, I'll write it out for you. So I wrote out headquarters helmet. And then he took a bunch of pieces of paper. I was doing dishes after dinner, and he occupied himself putting together. He asked me to come over and tape 2 things. I didn't even know what he was doing. By the end, he had created a kind of a box with a handle and some kind of visor and words and images on the inside. And you put it over your head, and you can use it to think about things, and you can see screens and so on. And he's never been exposed to any of this. He's pretty analog as kids go in the 21st century. So I just had to say that because it's a striking parallel, and he invites it, like he sees it as something that would be a great way to,
I assure you, at 5.5, I wasn't thinking like that.
So without a doubt, there are going to be individual applications that will accelerate progress in ways that couldn't happen without that technology.
Yep.
Without a doubt. Now, we're having this conversation.
Well, the argument is you're a professor in such high regard, but I remember not every professor I had was great. But in a digital AI-assisted world, why would we tolerate people who aren't good at communicating their message when they can feed the data in and have Scarlett Johansson teach the course if she'd license her voice to OpenAI?
Right. Well, it's not a rhetorical question, and I can't predict the future, but I can say that people ask the same question, whether rhetorically or not, about the internet. And they ask the same question, whether rhetorically or not, about VHS courses.
Sure.
And they ask the same question, whether rhetorically or not, about the book. So why would, library card, go to work.
Yes.
You can educate yourself with library. Well, you can and you can't. You can educate yourself with a library card if you know what to look for and why. and you have the power to self-scrutinize, and you have critical thinking abilities to distinguish what's authoritative from what's not, what's controversial from what's consensus, and so forth. And all those things have to come from somewhere. So there has to be some kind of lead in to all of that. That's what education is leading in to all of that. Can technology do that by itself? It's unlikely, and it seems a strange ambition.
Let's eliminate the absolute and not say in lieu of everything else.
Right.
How is it accretive to the educational experience? How do you anticipate it will be accretive to the educational experience? So it's not in lieu of a classroom setting with his interaction with your neighbors before and after and project work, but now instead of listening to someone who doesn't speak the language you speak and having them fumble through it, you get a very clear interpretation. For example, your work on representation, let's say you have an 80-page document progressing your work and where you are right now. And I don't have the time. I want to learn about it, but I don't have the time to read the 80 pages. But I could feed that today into Google's Notebook LLM or LM and ask it, would you take this 80-page document? I have a 30-minute commute on the Long Island Railroad tonight. Could you synthesize it into a podcast and give me all the relevant data in summary so I can listen to it on the way home tonight? And sure enough, a man and a woman will instantly be there as podcast hosts and give it to me in a way that's digestible, informative, abbreviated, obviously, and do it where I can listen on my AirPod Pros on the railroad on the way home tonight. That changes things.
It does. Sure. Like I said, there are going to be many local applications that do accelerate progress in ways that you could, to get that kind of a thing before, you would have had to have your own secretary, for example. Now, you might... And
she'd have to spend a lot of time.
Right, and be very time consuming. You might have reason to put more faith in your secretary's work than in the AI, but maybe that itself will change over time.
Learns,
maybe it's hallucination problems. By the way, I shouldn't be saying AI. I should be saying LLMs, because it begs the question against whether or not LLMs are AI. And there's good reason to reserve that term for other things. But
okay, but I'll use a specific term, Copilot. Using Copilot from Microsoft. I'm getting on an airplane on Tuesday, and I have 10 big things I want to read. I run it through Copilot. I get a one-page summary of each of them. So I've read it Friday before I'm headed to the airport I'm not going to get through all of those on the plane ride unless I'm going around the world a few times. But now I have a one-page summary that makes me conscious of where I want to delve. And I'm at least aware of where the conclusion is in this long report. And I can go to those parts that help me to understand it better.
I think it's great. I think it's great so long as people don't get the wrong idea about what it's doing, because any synopsis, you're going to have loss.
Sure.
So, for example, we're doing the representation project. Part of it is the past. So that's the intellectual history part. We read these very lengthy secondary sources, and they are written by people who've read the very lengthy primary sources. So they've really gone into the weeds. Mm-hmm. And what we extract as valuable for our own annotation is idiosyncratic as to our motives and informed by a frame of reference that we already have created. Mm-hmm. It would be difficult using basic prompts to get an LLM program to give us that.
Yes.
Now, we could get an LLM program, say, all right, I've got 40 possible texts on the 17th century, and I need to know what emphases exist. So give me 40 synopses of a paragraph each. Then, without doing the kind of college read and going through, I can see smart money is on, I look at these 10 and a little more. That kind of thing is very informed, but there's a sort of a safety net of nested reasoning there. And you know that you're playing the odds and you could be missing something. Yes. So you still have to bring a lot of nuance and a pretty broad and deep frame of reference to it in order for it to be used well. But if you're doing that, then it can be excellent. But I think this goes for technology generally. So what the internet has done, among other things, is it's made fantastic things possible. So it's allowed experts across the world to talk to each other instantly.
Have the source material.
In order to do so, all of these resources and tools in real time. But it's also created any number of problems for people who weren't bringing all of those skills to it in the first place. And I think that puts us back into the broader conversation, or subset of the conversation, because we're talking about this in part because we were talking about the situation of young people.
Yes.
And so then within that, I was talking about education, and you said, well, given you're talking about education, let's talk about AI. So let's then bring it back to this question about young people. Arguably, the or a central problem for young people, and it can be framed as in part a consequence of the economic circumstances I was talking about, and in part a consequence of the historical contingencies of formal schooling, is deracination.
Which is?
Rootlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Rootlessness.
Yeah.
I don't think young people feel connected to the past. I don't think they have been led to understand the past very well in formal schooling.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they feel a continuity with the past, because when they look at what a generation or two was able to do and what was standard and conventional, they don't see that as possible in their own lives.
Interesting.
What do we need in order to
it goes to something we probe a lot around here, which is it's all about relationships for us. And one of the subsets of interest we have around relationships and their importance to our health in every way, our happiness in every way, but it's also about belonging. And it seems to me like you're going down that path, because it seems to me that we're better people. Take a family unit. It's important in a family unit, in my family unit, that I want the next generation, my grandchildren's generation, and the grandchildren of my sisters and brothers et al., to know that they're part of a bigger thing. And that's several bigger things. A family, a business, a charity, our involvement. We have a family charity, and it thrills me to see the next generation in our family get involved, know that they have a role to play. They're part of something bigger. And a friend of mine, her name is Ambassador Shabazz, does a lot of work in the inner city, particularly with Black kids, where she thinks it's so important. She's doing a project in Newark that she's told me about a few times, that is all about working to develop in young men in particular, but young children in general, that they're part of something bigger, a school, a community, a team. She thinks having a sense of purpose and responsibility beyond yourself, because you're part of something bigger or beyond yourself, is so critical in our development and the behaviors we choose to perform or not. And that seems to be what you're talking about.
I agree.
So if you choose to go to St. John's University, it's a Catholic school. There's an expectations that you belong to a community there, and then there's all those sub-communities, whether you belong to a fraternity, a sorority, a club, all the different things that they can belong to, a team, that give that sense of us as a person, but us as defined by the other things we're part of.
Yes, and this is a good way to conceive of true education. It's not about getting facts in the most efficient manner. Getting facts in an efficient manner is a means to something else.
You're saying it has to have social context.
It has to have life context, including social context.
Uh-huh.
Conceiving of one's life outside of a social context is a mistake, and it's a mistake that's encouraged by, implicitly or just structurally, is encouraged by at least the rise of certain technologies. The phenomenon of cocooning is socially isolating
Yes.
in and of itself. But the content of the messages that a lot of people are receiving, especially young people online, via algorithmic processes, they're coming to be fed because they're curious for meaning.
Yep.
They're coming to be fed the message of egoism, of individualism, not just of me against the world in an aggressive way, but to understand value in a very insular way. Because I'm competing for myself, and that's what it all really boils down to, which is, of course, nonsense. And you can look at this from an intellectual historical point of view. This notion of individualism is relatively recent. It's relatively geographically isolated. I mean, I say that against the backdrop of all history, but still, a handful of countries for a handful of centuries is not most of history by any means. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the historical concept of individualism. And it's nonsense from an evolutionary point of view. It's not what we're evolved. Our evolutionary history doesn't give us to be that kind of way. Let's put it that way. We're not here to realize some sort of predestined evolutionary plan, because that's not how evolution works. Don't get me wrong, but it's a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. Most positive statements about human nature are the result of misunderstandings, because human nature is complicated and plastic in many ways, but not all.
But it's so if we say so.
Listen, so it's nonsense from an intellectual historical point of view. It's nonsense from an evolutionary point of view. But it's also nonsense from a logical point of view. The egoist is not as happy as the altruist. Now, there's, in one sense, the perfect altruist doesn't exist, because everybody, if seeing you happy makes me happy, then I'm involved in it too. So It's not complete altruism, but that's just a fiction. Like, of course, we should use the word altruist for people who are made happy by the happiness of others. So if we use the word altruist in this sense, the altruist is bound to be happier than the egoist, because there are more opportunities for happiness.
Well, and they're more likely to be optimistic.
They're more likely to be optimistic.
And we know that optimists are much happier than pessimists, although the majority of us are born pessimistic. I'm told by my friend, Dr. George Everly, my research partner, writing partner, that 80% of us are born more pessimistic than optimistic. But many of us learn to become optimists along the way. And the data proves those who are optimists are happier, healthier, both mental health and physical health. They have more and better relationships. They're the kind of people you want to be around. Yet, you have to work to become an optimist. It doesn't come natural to all of us, but it does have a huge bearing on us. And then I wonder what role, and I've been on an exploration of recent vintage. As I get older and get closer to the end, I question faith, what role religion, different than faith, plays in our life and our happiness. I have several friends who I think have a deep faith, and they seem happier and more content than my friends who don't. And so I'm on a little exploration. What role does faith and religion as an adjunct of that, what role do they play in our development and our happiness and our social order?
I think that even before addressing questions of faith and religion, a person can come to appreciate that other people are as valuable as himself or herself. And once you appreciate that other people are as valuable as oneself, then you can be an altruist, because you can place happiness in their happiness. You can find happiness. And that's arguably the starting place for all wisdom. This is arguably the lesson that you get from Socrates. He doesn't know that, and that's what makes him wise. He knows that he doesn't know. I got interested in philosophy because I caught myself in the act of having opinions. So I was like 13, and I was able to make pretty sophisticated sounding arguments about this or that based on rights, for example.
But having studied philosophy and history, you realize that, what do you realize about organized religion?
Well, so when you study philosophy, what you do is you take a step back from all of the things that you take for granted. So for me, it was saying, why am I so comfortable invoking this notion of rights, say, or God?
Yep.
Like, let's analyze, where does the notion of rights come from, or where does faith in the existence of God come from, or something else? And in stepping back from that, you appreciate how difficult it is, and the consequence of that is not, oh, it's just a free-for-all. It's not, oh, just believe whatever you want because everything is relative to your own personal opinion. That's putting a huge amount of faith in your personal opinion. That's granting it authority. No, the point is, your personal opinion is a very humble starting point. And so you need to bracket everything to start with and move very cautiously forward. And if that's what you know that you're up to the entire time, then you don't have the expectation of full revelation and complete wisdom and having a settled belief, yes or no, on every single, given important proposition.
But it's easy.
It's easy to do what I'm describing.
I'm going to define it. I'm going to give a definition. That's what I believe.
Sure. Yeah, you think so?
It's a shortcut.
It's a way of
coping.
Yes, it is. It's a way, and it's not only that. And I'm glad that you brought this up. It's not just a shortcut and a way of coping, although it is that. It's a way of advertising yourself to other people and yourself. It's a way of cultivating a kind of identity.
Who I am.
Yeah. And it becomes about, this is me, this is who I want to see myself as, this is how I want other people to see me, and not about the argument. Now, when I say argument, I don't mean a fight with words or anything like that. I mean putting together the logical, structured premises and conclusions,
yes.
Drawing a conclusion carefully. It's not about that for a lot of people. And we have to remind ourselves of that when we find ourselves disagreeing with people about politics or about religion, the things that people get fraught and conflicted about. Very often, they're not actually engaged maybe in the same project you are. You're trying to put together an argument. You're trying to establish premises that are reasonable and safe and plausible, and then move from them towards a conclusion. But other people aren't necessarily doing that, and it's very worthwhile to keep that in mind. But insofar as you are doing that, insofar as you're engaged in that project, then you should appreciate how tremendously difficult it is. And I have, on this point, is it okay for me to read a little bit?
Sure.
It's not my own, it's something that I've quoted. There's a psychologist, actually, Eleanor Rosch, who points out that the Madhyamaka, so the ancient Buddhist texts, question our understanding of causality. And, so the idea is that we're only satisfied with a causal explanation if the effect looks like the cause.
Yes.
But there's something circular about this. This was pointed out in Buddhism way before it was pointed out in Western history. And then a philosopher later on, this guy Mark Price, pointed out that when it comes to the mind, the effects are very separate looking from the causes. And so we're bound to be dissatisfied with causal explanation.
Is it helpful to look back and do that causal analysis?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm all for it. I'm committed to a couple of different scientific projects at the moment. But while you're doing it, you have to stand in awe of how difficult it is to get a coherent causal explanation and whether or not we understand what causality is at all. And all of that applies not just in cognitive science and so forth, but to questions of faith. And Oscar Wilde was very eloquent on this. And this is from a notebook that he kept between the ages of about 20 and 25, which I think is worth noting. He says, matter, motion, and force are merely symbols of the unknown cause or reality which is coextensive with all the phenomena of the world. Progress is as much to the unknown and unknowable as to the known. Ultimately, all accountable and natural facts are unaccountable and unnatural. It's Oscar Wilde in his early 20s. He nailed it. We're never going to do better than that. We're never going to have a God's eye point of view.
but we still need control. We need to bracket things as givens to be able to function. Or at least I think I do.
We've come to think of ourselves that way.
Yeah.
But if you think about the very early Christians, the holy fools, they
were certainly breaking with convention.
They were breaking with convention, kind of deliberately thwarting the notion of control, and all the way through some even much later in the Middle Ages. The idea of planning ahead was seen as ungodly or hubristic.
Really?
Yeah, it was. A little bit, let's make sure we have enough food for tomorrow.
Yeah,
let's plant the seeds, so that
why bother with this year's crop?
Yeah, no, you bother with this year's crop. That's tradition. That's the better part of prudence. But don't get too comfortable with the idea that it's going to come, and don't form expectations. In other words, don't take for granted that the future will be like the past, and don't take for granted that you have a good hold on how things work.
How long have you been teaching now at St. John's?
Since I think 2013, give or take.
What surprises you about your students?
They have excellent manners, and that sounds like a superficial thing. It isn't. Etiquette is superficial. Manners is not superficial. Manners are behaviors that are engaged in
thoughtfulness
with a view towards making the other person at ease.
Yes.
So thoughtfulness of the other person. That's what it is. And if you're not living life closely with another person, most of what you're going to get by way of interaction is manners. That's your sense of their character, but it's still very meaningful.
Yeah.
And so most students I only know so well, but I find that they have excellent manners, which is to say that they're thoughtful, they are other regarding in practice, even if here and there when you probe their ideas, they might have, problematic notions concerning individualism, or they might be deracinated in various ways. This much has been preserved, and that's evidence that it's not total deracination and it's not total egoism. There is altruism.
Is there any situation that really surprised you? Maybe a project that your students are working on? Or?
Well, I had a surprising situation yesterday. I had a student who's doing very well and bombed a particular question on a test, and I think the question is a very important one. It has to do with disentangling bad evolutionary theory from good evolutionary theory. And the point is, if you misunderstand evolutionary theory, then that can misinform your worldview on any number of fronts. It can
too absolutist. Huh?
Too absolutist. You don't understand. You start to misunderstand things about the economy. You start to misunderstand things about society and politics, and it's a real rot if you misunderstand evolutionary theory. And he'd been doing well in other respects, but he bombed this, and it was so atypical that I asked him to meet with me, even though that's not
as a punishment.
Standard. Well, I did kind of regard it as something that like evidence that he's putting in the work, that he agreed to it. It's not really necessarily written into the syllabus, but he did. He came, and I talked it through with him once last week, and I said, okay, so clearly, it didn't land with you, and now we recognize that. Why don't you take a few days and come back to an office hours next week, and we'll talk about it again. And we did, and he got it, and I got to be there. This was only yesterday, in real time, as he understood it for the first time, and it was like watching the scales fall from somebody's eyes. Yeah. And there were waves of it. So, okay. So that means, and that means also this. And then he's like, wait a minute. And we were about to have class.
But I mean, as a teacher, that's nirvana, isn't it?
Oh, it was wonderful. But instead of it being about, reckoning with a problem in his grade or a problem in, his engagement in the
he
course.
Was really into the subject.
He was just, I wasn't even there anymore. He was working it out for himself, and then he was digging his notes out of his bag and reading it to me. And so when you said this, and the reading said this is what it meant. And he wasn't even looking at me. He was kind of looking off to the side, like, I get it now. I get it now. That it really affects everything. I get it. My mind is blown. Don't we have class now? Yeah, we have class in like 4 minutes. And then I met him, upstairs, like 3 or 4 flights up in 4 minutes time, and taught the next class.
That's great.
Yeah.
But that's why you're a teacher.
It is. And it was so untransactional, and it was so untethered to any kind of immediate reward for him.
Almost
it was really
philosophical.
Almost about becoming educated.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a circle we've gone on here. How? Tell me about, with your journey. Tell me about your faith.
I think it's best exemplified by the agnosticism book. That's where I went back and forth on this for so long, and I've arrived at this. I've arrived at a place of peace.
Comfortable with unknown.
Yeah, I'm at peace with the
doesn't
the
change
limits
how
of
you
our
behave as
understanding.
a member of the community, a father, a husband, a teacher, a professional community. It doesn't change. You don't need to have a definition. You're comfortable with, I don't know, but it doesn't matter.
It's not that I don't know, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't determine what I do next.
But you choose to abide by the prescription and rules of a religion. Not because it's the social appropriate thing to do, and not because you'll get rewarded or punished in some afterlife.
Insofar as religion can be consistent with or encourage what I see as living well, then I'm open to it and open to engaging with it, and I'm against people being judgmental about it, for example. But it has to be in line with these values and these truths. That there are perversions of religion that I find despicable, and many people who would describe themselves as traditionally religious and straightforwardly theist and so on would have problems with as well.
You're familiar with an interesting professor of comparative religions at Princeton, Bernard Lewis. He talked about his point of view was the Muslim faith is a failed faith, which is extremely controversial. He's since passed. But I was just intrigued by a man who would say that about a religion. So I've read some of his works, really interesting. But it sounds to me like an agnostic says, well, there's Hinduism, there's Buddhism, there's Muslim, there's Christian, there's Jews, there's all these options out there for me. And choosing one to be, the commonality it seems to all of them is a set of rules to govern ourselves, to live in community, to live obviously the judgmental here, a fruitful and productive life. We need to embrace some set of rules. And they all seem to have a similar context, is to treat people like you'd like to be treated, and you're part of something bigger, and you have responsibilities as part of something bigger.
Sacrifice as well.
Yes. The sacrifice is key to all of those things, all of those religions.
There's a famous movie about, I think it might be John Huston, but I'm not sure. A famous movie about nuns, and in it the nun ends up sacrificing. And my friend, my film teacher as well, said this, the lesson here is it's not the incidental trappings of religion. It's that sacrifice is what is meaningful. Now, you can come to appreciate that absent any religion. But given religion in a good sense, it's hard to avoid appreciating the value of sacrifice. So that's a real value that can come from religion.
Well, you've only given me more questions.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Tell me, with an exciting year around campus with the basketball team doing so well. What's the buzz around the campus now? What's hot topics?
Well, there is this almost ubiquitous talk of belt tightening and this kind of thing. There are some enrollment issues that everyone's having, and so we're having them too. Mm-hmm. I think that broadly speaking, we're not in a place of panic or anything like that, but I think there's maybe inevitably some uncertainty in the atmosphere as a consequence of that. And I suppose those of us who are there, fully employed, or those of us who are there as students enrolled, we're in it already. So, yeah. But for those of us who are marginally employed by the university, or those of us who might be considering going to the university, or having trouble affording anything, or having trouble passing classes, that this might be a time of heightened stress, perhaps.
If you think about the brand of St. John's and all the things that go into a brand, what's different about St. John's?
Well, in St. John's, everyone does philosophy and theology courses, and one of the mandatory philosophy courses is called The Human Person, which I teach all the time. And I'm not saying that's chief amongst them or anything along those lines, by no means, but it's a good example of what St. John's has as its mission to achieve in education, which is to educate the whole person. So you're not there to
trying to trade.
Right. And the very idea of, we're talking about the hubris of planning for the future. If you put all your eggs in one basket and try to, just learn whatever it is, radiology,
computer science,
radiology or coding or something, yep. And all of a sudden, there are AI programs in some sense that can do radiology
absolutely
better than you, or the kind of coding you learned has become obsolete. Was it a waste of time learning those things? No. Is it an unnecessary vulnerability to conceive of your education solely in terms of formal schooling that allows you to develop this particular skill? Of course it is. So somewhat ironically, the safe bet when it comes to education is the well-rounded education, is the education of the whole person. That's the resilient, resourceful person who can figure out what to do when plan A doesn't work.
Well, Professor Francis Fallon, I think your students are lucky to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to have them.
Thanks for being here today.
Anytime.